The objective today is to explain how networking works in general. And I know that's a very broad objective, but I just want everybody to hammer down what that word networking means. I'm going to go through the layers of abstraction the best I can, that way we could come out on the other side feeling more confident about the term. And I mean, you're in the cybersecurity class. Cybersecurity deals with networking quite a bit. And so at the end, if you could just take a bunch of words in a word bank and put them together to explain what networking is in general, I'll feel like we had a very successful day. And notice our IB profile is communicators and has funkily got down to the lower line. And I'm going to just leave it like that because being communicator is one thing, but communicating in the plural sense in terms of many networks, I thought that was just an ironic typo that I'd go ahead and just leave. So here's our table of contents. I'm going to talk about the concept of computers listening. I'm going to talk about the difference between an IP address and a MAC address. Going to go through some weird abstractions. Then we'll talk about the difference between a switch and a hub, a router and a modem. Talk about the concept of nodes. I'll give you some parting words, some advice, and then you'll do your DOL. So let's get started. Networking can be tough at first, but then it gets relatively easy. Once the vocab and concepts are nailed down, you just rinse and repeat ways to fix or set up your networks. Many people make a great living doing this. Now, some keep pushing and really get into the science and technicalities of networking, but that's not what this lesson will be about. Again, save yourself time if you feel like you really know networking, and don't watch this because I'm just really going through the baby steps or trying to do an entire video of explain it to me like I'm 5 kind of style, okay? So, instead of having names, computers have numbers, and those numbers are what they know themselves to be. So I'm Mr. H, and my computer here is 192.23.7.0. But some people, like switches, will call him D8, D3. You know, that's the MAC address right there, and it's a little bit longer, isn't it? So what I'm saying is computers have names like people, and they also have other names like people. So all day, a computer will just sit there on a network, and if he's connected to a hub, he can hear the names and data of other computers all day long. He gets these little zaps of electricity all day, but unless he hears his name, he just ignores it all. So he hears like Sam 1010001, hey Mary 100, but as soon as he hears his name, let's say Steve, hey Steve, now he cares. Now he'll start looking at these numbers and he'll want to figure out what he's supposed to do with those numbers. So once you have your computer's attention, you can give him or her pictures, text, and even videos to display on the monitor. Your think right share here is, how did I say you get your computer's attention on a network? And I know some of you are going to make the joke I'm thinking you're going to make when you answer that think right share. So you've been paying attention in class, right? You know how binary works. So when I say zaps, I mean the right order of zaps to let the computer know you're talking to him. If his name is 65, he'll know when you say 1000001, okay? So those are the zaps thing I was talking about. Okay, so we're at the computer. We've gotten that computer's attention. Now we're going to just go down the line. Next up on our trip will be a hub. Now, by the way, networking is such a crazy concept that you'll often see pictures like this to illustrate networking. This is just an abstraction, obviously. So what's a hub? A hub is a thing that just like brute force sends all data to all ports. Hubs are not very common in your typical household network. Now, switches are a little bit more caring. Switches care to learn the name of the computer, that is its MAC address, before sending data. They typically operate at the link layer. So what I mean by that, I'm thinking like the real world, not the IP address logical world, okay? IP addresses are in existence specifically for networking, okay? So this carrying switch that is used to working in the real world can sometimes come not into the real world, come into the fantasy world here. So here's my analogy for a hub and a switch. If you've seen this movie Labyrinth, it's a 80s classic, I would say, one of my favorites, one of my family's favorites. So that's how I like to think about a switch. So the switch creates networks. They're important, they're useful, but you might not have one in your house. So now let's talk about these combo ideas. A lot of times you'll have routers and modems in one. So a router is connecting networks. From my personal experience, I have this CenturyLink modem, which has a built-in router, and so it looks like this. You can see an antenna for Wi-Fi sticking out of it, but it's also a modem because for me to get to the internet from my company CenturyLink, the data needs to change modes. But I've recently switched to Comcast, which I kind of regret because they have a 1 terabyte data cap on me and I keep running over it and having to pay extra fees. But the point is Comcast, my strategy with Comcast was to go ahead and just buy the modem separately, and then I got a fancy pants router for security purposes. And this router is the thing that connects to my computer. So you see here, it kind of depends on where we're at in the network. But again, I'm trying to just give this general overview of what the word networking means so much, not how to build and create and troubleshoot networks. But to get a little more into the terminology of what we're talking about, you have LANs and WANs. So LAN stands for local area network. So that's the desktop, really. This desktop is just one item in the LAN. With this antenna, I can have my cell phone over here, and that's another thing on the LAN. So here I have a local area network, and what am I doing? I'm connecting to what's called a wide area network. That's the internet itself. So in this example, I'm talking about using my phone to connect to the router, and then the router connects to a modem which connects to the internet. So what does that mean? My phone is experiencing some of the switching capabilities I talked to earlier. When the internet sends data to the router has to figure out if it's going to send that data to the computer or if it's going to send the data directly to my phone. Speaking of which, what makes a smartphone smart? It's simply having an internet connection on the phone. Or at least this is the best definition I've found. If your phone can do some fancy pants things like games and stuff, it's not much different than something from the 80s you might know about, a Game Boy. So it's not just a gaming console and a phone, it's a smartphone if it has the ability to connect to the internet. So for the sake of this lesson, I want to share with you what I envision when I'm thinking networks. I'm thinking like spider webs, even if you have a very tiny one with just a couple threads. Networks, or some networks, can look very similar to spider webs. So let's take a closer look at this picture again. As you see, here lies the difference in a router versus modem. I don't think anyone has a smaller than 2-item network at their home. If you're a family of 3 and all 3 of you have a smartphone, you have 3 things on the network if you're, of course, connecting to the Wi-Fi, unless you're just using data from your data plan. You should know the United Nations has deemed internet access a basic human right, just like access to clean water is a basic human right. That's how important they're saying the internet is to people. So before you get to the next part of this lesson, go ahead and answer, what is the difference between a LAN and a WAN? So now are you wondering why you need that middleman of a router? Well, a modem actually only has one job, to change modes. So last I checked, ISPs like Comcast are not using Ethernet cable to connect to your house. Here in Colorado Springs, we have Comcast, which uses coaxial cable, and CenturyLink, which uses RJ11, which looks like just your old school telephone line. It is your old school telephone line. So regardless of the modem you purchased, you can connect through this type of cable or this type of cable. And what has to happen in that modem is the way the data is being sent in these two, it has to change to the way that the Cat5 cables communicate with data. Or if it's connecting with a Cat5 to a router, then it goes from this, let's say I'm with Comcast, so it goes from a coaxial cable to a Cat5 cable to a router where it turns into radio signals with Wi-Fi. Those are 3 different modes already before you've even loaded up your app on your phone. So with that said, what's the difference between a router and a modem? And the last big vocab word I want to finish off with today is the term node. There are many stops along the way data makes to get from your friend's smartphone to yours. Each stop is typically referred to as a node. So in this lesson, we didn't talk about servers or satellites or other nodes like that. But they do exist. So in your own words, what's a node? Now to summarize the whole lesson, the way computers talk to each other, aka network, they listen for the right order of zaps. These zaps travel from one type of wire to another, sometimes through the air, or even light particles if we're talking fiber optics. And some of the nodes on the network are switches, routers, and modems. Now, there are many tests you can take to show your level of networking knowledge. You would go from the entry or the bottom and work your way up. So started at the bottom, now you're here. These are the names of certs. So I have a book called CCENT Prep. I also have another book for CCNA. These other certifications, the CCNP, CCIE, they're too advanced for me. But if talking about networks sounds like something you like, I really suggest you listen to a podcast called Data Nuts. They are entertaining and super educational. But if you're looking for just entry-level kind of IT work, you'd start with a CompTIA A+, maybe a CompTIA Network Plus. CCENT wouldn't hurt to have. You see it's slightly a step below the Network Plus. But notice how these salaries are increasing the higher up you go, man. I'd love to make $120,000 a year. I think my children would love if I made $120,000 a year. So we did a lot of compare and contrast today. Of all the comparisons we looked at, which would you say were the most different? My example would be the router and the switch, because for a switch to become a router, all it needs to do is connect to a modem. Now that would be dangerous to do, and switches aren't designed to take that amount of traffic. A lot of them aren't. But the point is, they are super similar. And I just realized I asked you to give me the most different. Make sure you do that. Don't give me something that's very similar. If I gave you something that's the most different, then I've eliminated some of your choices. I want you to have as many choices as possible. So under no circumstance should anybody be writing about switches and routers being the most different, because they really are the most similar of all the things I discussed. If you don't agree with me, argue with me in the comments there. Or if you're in my class, argue with me in your Think Right shares that you turn in. So this is sort of how I imagine all your faces are looking as I explain just networking in general for you. I'm hoping you're like, oh, I get it now. We're in IB school, so let's answer some IB questions. What do you think today's lesson was all about? Here's your DOL, using these words: IP, MAC, LAN, WAN, binary, switch, router, modem, node. I forgot hexadecimal. Anything else you could think of? Explain to me what people are talking about when they mention computer networks. Your sentence starter, if you need one: a computer network is, and then you just write.